The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, you'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
The Derbyshire Dales series is sponsored by Gainsborough Cycles, 01427 617 752. For all your cycling needs, this is your one-stop shop located at 20 Ropery Road, Gainsborough, or online at gainsboroughcycles.com. There's a link in the description. Gainsborough Cycles, ask for Trevor Halstead. Welcome back to the Derbyshire Dales, everybody, for the last time this week, and I think I may have saved the best until last this week. I'm starting in a pretty nondescript area of modern housing which is called Leecroft, and the first landmark behind me is actually a doctor's surgery. That is by far and away not the best thing about this little place. A few years ago, when we covered Thanet in Kent, I went to a place called Winster. If you take the M of Minster and turn it upside down, you get this place. This is Winster. Winster, Wine's Thorn Tree. To end this current run through the Dales, today we come to the pretty little village of Winster, which lies about 5 miles away from Matlock and 6 from Bakewell. At an altitude of approximately 820 feet above sea level, this one's got itself a rather lofty perch. The village lies within the Peak District National Park, and the Peak District Boundary Walk runs right through the village. Economically, Winster was a centre for lead mining, and indeed some reckon it might even have been born here in Roman times. The boom in mining in the late 17th century saw the population rise to 2,000 by 1750 and turned the village into a prosperous town, one of the largest in the county. Winster has many listed buildings, the most notable being its impressive market house, which was acquired by the National Trust in 1906. Without a doubt, that's the one landmark that visitors to Winster flock to, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Winster also has several old chapels, a couple of pubs, a shop or two, a village hall known as the Burton Institute, and the Parish Church of St John the Baptist. All of those are worth checking out, and on this route we will do just that. Winster is known well for a week-long annual carnival called Winster Wakes. It starts on the first Sunday on or after the 24th of June, which is the patronal day of St John the Baptist. Main Street is closed briefly on the Sunday for the Wakes Parade, and for much of the following Saturday there are stalls and entertainment, including Morris dancing in the street. Well, I won't be doing any of that, but I will be walking these streets. Are you coming with me? Today's walk will start and end at the doctor's surgery on Leecroft Road. This is the second of the 3 Darley-Dale branches we've seen now. We saw the first in Yulgrave on Monday. The Leecroft area dates from the 1950s. It was built as an estate of council houses. More new housing was to follow this on nearby Wintour Avenue in the 1960s. For the most part, this first section of the route is residential, and that means we can fill in a bit of information as we make our way towards the village centre. Winster is a picturesque village in the southeast of the Peak District. It occupies an upland location that's between 700 and 900 feet above sea level, depending on where you are. The name Winster is first recorded in the Domesday Book as Winstern, which most likely means Wine's Thorn Tree or Wyn's Thorn Tree. Presumably that's after a local landmark. Winster is located in a broad valley where a steep limestone bank to the south meets one of shale and gritstone to the north. This geology gives Winster much of its distinctive character, both in the walled fields with their limestone outcrops and in the mixture of limestone and gritstone from which the houses are built. Lead mining, for which Winster is famous, may have had its origins here in Roman times. They certainly mined it in this part of Derbyshire. It was, though, in the 17th century when the lead mining boom really happened. It saw the population of Winster grow to an astronomical 2,000 people. That was a lot in those days. Winster was less of a village and more like a prosperous town. It was one of the largest settlements in Derbyshire at that time. Lead mining's largest flaw was flooding, which became more of a problem as the workings went ever deeper, and eventually it forced many of the mines to shut down. The last working mine at Mill Close, 2 miles northeast of Winster, employed a large number of local men until it closed in 1938. Roads and trackways also played a large part in Winster's development. The most important was the Derbyshire Portway. Although it doesn't pass through Winster, it ran close by. Salt routes from Cheshire also passed nearby, and the 18th century turnpike road from Nottingham to Newhaven also went through the village. Winster today has a population that's about a quarter of the size of what it was back in the 1750s. Now, few residents work in the village, instead travelling to Bakewell or Matlock. Although there's been a gradual change to Winster's appearance and size, it certainly hasn't declined. Winster is still one of the most lively villages in the area. Let's see what it's got. Now, the one reason above all that many people flock to Winster is to check out this building behind me. You can't really miss it, to be honest with you. It's kind of an odd one out, because most of this village, as you can probably tell, is made of stone. This thing is made of brick. And there's a bit of a debate as to how old this actually is. Let's find out. It's called the Market House. You can't really miss Winster Market House. Entering the village centre, this is one of the first things you're attracted to, almost instantly. The Market House is the only substantial brick building here. Grade 2 listed, the building was commissioned by the Lords of the Manor, which from 1570 were Gervase and Anthony Eyre of Newbold Manor. It was designed in a neoclassical style, built in coarse stone and red brick, and it's believed to have been completed in the 16th century. Rather curiously though, that date doesn't add up. Winster wasn't granted the right to hold a market until the following century, and so there's a bit of debate to how old this building actually is. It was originally open on the ground floor so that markets could be held, with an assembly hall on the first floor. The design involved a symmetrical main frontage that faced north onto Main Street. There were short columns supporting stone arches on the ground floor, while the first floor was faced in brick and fenestrated by cross windows with stone surrounds. Ownership of the building was passed down through generations of the Eyre family until Anne Eyre married Clotworthy Skeffington, the first Earl of Masserine, in 1741. The arches were later infilled with coarse stone, probably in the first half of the 19th century, to encourage an alternative use. That's because the sale of agricultural goods, which is what would have taken place here to begin with, declined significantly in the wake of the Great Depression. The building fell vacant and its condition deteriorated rapidly. During the late 19th century, it was acquired by Joseph Greatorex, owner of the Old Bowling Green Inn on East Bank. Greatorex agreed to sell the Market House to the National Trust for £50 in 1906. It was the Trust's first ever acquisition in Derbyshire, and didn't they get it for an absolute steal? When they took it on, the first floor assembly room was in a particularly poor condition, but it was soon restored to a design by William Weir, the National Trust resident architect. He used local labour under the supervision of Henry Rye, who was the architect to Henry Manners, the 8th Duke of Rutland. The assembly room was subsequently fitted out with interpretation panels detailing the history of Winster and, in particular, its importance to the mining industry. Also within the room today, you can find a scale model of the village, purposely constructed as part of the historical exhibition on display to visitors. So if you want to take a perch here inside the Market House, you've got two options. You've got a bench, which the camera is currently on at the moment, or you can sit on this. This, apparently, is a 19th century school desk. There's a little plaque here which tells you a little bit about it. It says 19th century desk from Winster School, donated by Bill Staney, restored for Winster Local History Group in September 2005. Brilliant, you're literally sat on a piece of history. So this is the pub that Joseph Greatorex once owned. Just a few steps away from the market hall is the Old Bowling Green Inn. The Old Bowling Green dates back to 1472, though most of the present building is 18th century. Curiously, the inn walls are 3 feet and 3 inches thick. If you don't know your metric and imperial measurements, that means they're exactly 1 metre thick. That fact poses the following question: was this the first metric pub in Britain? Nowadays, the village is served by 2 pubs. We'll come to the other one in a short while. In times past, Winster's lead miners had, get this, 24 pubs to pick from. That seems like an extraordinarily high number until you consider that it was commonly believed that drinking a large amount of ale was a good way to counteract lead poisoning. Like I said in Elton yesterday, if you believe that, you'll believe anything. Those lead miners knew what they were doing. As the road starts to gently make its way up an incline, an old Wesleyan Reformed chapel appears on the right-hand side. This dates back to 1852 and it's part of a continuous terrace of houses. There were 3 Methodist chapels in Winster. This one's definitely not the most attractive, as we'll see shortly. Once beyond the chapel, the road starts to rise sharply uphill and the properties become almost randomly orientated. This area is known as Winster Bank. Most of the cottages which huddle together on this steep hillside were more than likely to have been the modest homes of the poorest lead miners, quarrymen and agricultural workers. They spread out between 2 steep roads, East Bank and West Bank, and they're linked by a web of narrow pathways. All around Winster Bank there are old mine shafts and grassy mounds, visible leftovers from the days of lead mining. In every sense, Winster Bank can be considered a miner's shantytown. That's a term not often connected with a UK village, but here it definitely makes sense. Well, I'll tell you something, people. If you were a Winster lead miner, you must have been one of the fittest people around, because the hill I've just had to climb up, very, very steep. And yeah, they must have had calf muscles like boulders. Anyway, our next landmark is at the top of one of these hills, and it must have a fantastic view. It's a chapel. Let's check it out. Built in 1823 and extensively enlarged in 1850, Winster's primitive Methodist chapel is perched high on the hillside at the top of Winster Bank. Its position means it's somewhat of an elusive chapel, tucked away as it is on the hillside behind lots of houses. If you didn't know it was there, then you would probably never see it. Situated as it is, it has fantastic views over the Derbyshire countryside. The Primitive Methodist magazine of 1833 contains an account of the reopening of this chapel. After it was enlarged, the service took place on the 19th of August 1832, when the preacher was a W. Close of Hull. It had to be made bigger because the original building was too small to deal with the ever-growing number of residents in Winster. The chapel has a memorial over one of the external doors. It memorialises the Reverend George Booth, whose mortal remains are deposited somewhere near the tablet, but nobody knows where. Now we come to the Miners' Standard, the second of the 2 pubs. This is a cosy 17th century inn on the edge of the village with views across the valley. The Miners' Standard is an apt name given the proximity of the Winster Bank shantytown. Many of the men who worked in the mines would have come here at the end of a shift. Primarily, Winster's men used to work at Mill Close Mine. It was one of the most productive lead mines in the world and the largest in the Peak District. It was worked for hundreds of years, but in 1938, with no new ore in sight and the price of lead falling, the mine was shut down. The mine as standard today has a display of some old mining equipment. Together with the name of the pub, it all ensures that this part of Winster's history will never be forgotten. In the Peak Mining Museum at Matlock, Bath, you can find a recreation of a water pressure engine which was discovered in one of the local lead mines. It had originally been built at Colebrookdale in 1819 for the Allport mines near Yallgrave, before being moved to Winster nearly 30 years later. Okay, so what goes up must come down, and now we're making our way back down East Bank. This will take us back into the village again, and the next thing to see is the third of those three chapels. We've still got quite a few other things to see as well. We still need to talk about the church, we still need to talk about the shop and Winster Old Hall, and a few other bits and bobs besides. Completing the trio of chapels, next we have what is, in the opinion of many locals, and myself actually, by far the most attractive of the three Methodist buildings in Winster. Like the smaller Wesleyan Reformed Chapel on East Bank, it has two round arched windows, but also has extra lights on either side, giving it a less Spartan appearance. There was also a blocked window high up in the west end, whilst the pulpit was against the blank east wall. As we mentioned earlier, Winster once had 24 pubs. This next thing is one of the 22 which are no longer in operation. It's called the Old Shoulder of Mutton. First recorded in 1753, the Shoulder of Mutton operated as an inn until 1916, when it closed as a result of the Defence of the Realm Act. For the latter half of the 19th century, it was run by the Bone brothers, firstly by John and then, upon his death, by Benjamin. It appears that a man named William Heath took it on in 1913. He might well have been the same William Heath who used to run another former Winster pub called the Bull's Head. By trade, he was a tradesman and did all sorts like glazing, plumbing and painting. The Bull's Head is situated at the bottom of East Bank, not far from the market house. The Old Shoulder of Mutton is currently operating as a bed and breakfast. Their website has a more detailed history, as well as a few photographs of the building. Not far from that former pub is the Village Hall, but this isn't known as the Village Hall. Instead, it has a different title, the Burton Institute. In 1902, a man called Joseph Burton, who was born in Winster in 1832, donated this building to Winster Parish Council in trust for the benefit of the village. He was a provisions merchant in Nottingham at that time. In 1841, at the age of 7, he was living on Market Street in Winster. His father was a blacksmith. 10 years later, he was at Town Street, again in Winster, apprenticed to Henry Taylor, a local grocer and draper. By 1861, Joseph was in Nottingham as a grocer with his own apprentice, Robert Newton. 1 year later, Joseph was married in Nottingham to Annie Ball. A decade later, still in Nottingham, he was employing 12 men. Though he was far away from the village, his affection for Winster was so strong that he called his Nottingham residence Winster House. In 1900, Joseph's business became a limited company. By the time of the 1901 census, 3 of his sons were also provisions merchants. When he died, aged 84 in 1916, the company had 40 shops. Okay, so essentially everything that's left is on the main street through Winster now, including this, the church, which is kind of not on the main street. It's kind of a bit further away from the main street, if you know what I mean, but it's sort of all on the same road. If you look on the map, you'll see what I mean. Anyway, this is next, and we'll talk a bit about this, and also a little bit about the Winster Wakes Festival, which is related to it. Winster's church is dedicated to St John the Baptist. The oldest part of the building is its west tower, built in 1721. The remainder of the church is 19th century and was the result of a rebuilding between 1840 and 1883. St John's contains an unusual font which is of Norman style and a stained glass window designed by Edward Burne-Jones. The latter, made by the William Morris Company, was installed in 1883. Though Winster can be proud of its church, it would rather forget one of its former rectors. Named Reverend Britton, he once sold the village hall's piano to make a bit of pocket money. The dedication to St John the Baptist ties in nicely with Winster's Wakes Festival. Lasting a week, it begins on the first Sunday after the 24th of June every year. That day is considered to be the feast day of St John. Winster's Wakes celebration is one of the finest of its kind in Derbyshire. It sees Morris dancers performing in the street, a parade, and a raft of traditional entertainment and street stalls. A procession leads through the village, finishing at the miners' standard for refreshment. It consists of 16 dancers, led by a king and queen, both looking dignified and well dressed. A jester prances around them, whilst a witch goes through the motions of sweeping the road before them with a broom. As for the Morris men, Winsters are among one of the oldest troops in the country, with their own dances and folk tunes. At the turn of the 20th century, their tunes were collected by the legendary Cecil Sharp and were rediscovered in the folk revival of the 60s and 70s. In stark contrast to the jumble-like maze of Winster Bank, the High Street is surprisingly grand in comparison. It's closed in by the Market House at one end and the Dower House at the other. A number of the buildings on the High Street, some of which were once shops, date from the heyday of mining. Winster has a ridiculous number of listed buildings, 69 in total. A lot of them can be found along the High Street. No surprise then that the entire village centre has been declared a conservation area in an effort to maintain its architectural heritage. Well, there's no denying that the Market House is the most impressive building here in Winster, but there is another one which should be considered, and we're looking at it right now. Behind those trees there is Winster Hall, which is sometimes known as Winster Old Hall. Let's talk a bit about this. This building is Winster Hall. It's alternatively known as the Old Hall. The building was once the home of the historian and archaeologist Llewellyn Jewett. It's also said to be haunted. It has a very striking exterior, with Tuscan columns flanking the entrance. The original hall was said to have been built between 1628 and 1629 for Francis Moore, a proprietor of several local lead mines. The stone used in the construction is said to have come from the Stancliffe quarries in Darley Dale, being transported on pack horses. The hall was rebuilt by the Moore family in around 1720. It passed by marriage to the Jewess Cokes and then to the Maxwells, by whom it was sold in 1873 to John Joseph Briggs, a well-known naturalist. Until the construction of the vicarage, the hall was occupied by the various incumbents of Winster, notably the Reverends Shirley, Harvey, Dyke and Mason. In 1880, the hall was sold to the Heathcote brothers, who converted it into a hydropathic institution. However, this business was not successful and it was put up for sale in 1882. It was purchased by Captain Tom George Metcalfe in 1883, who owned it until his death in 1890. His widow lived there for a few more years, and the hall was again up for sale in 1896. It was then lived in by William Marsland until 1903, and then his widow until 1926, when it was sold for £750 to a Mr. Butler of Wingfield. In the 1970s, the hall became a hotel. It closed as such in 1999 and reverted to being a private dwelling. Winster once had a plethora of shops. These days, the only one that remains is this, right next to the Market House. It's just a simple everyday shop, but it does double as a post office too. In 2022, this business was honoured royally when it was given the King's Award for Voluntary Service. It was presented to its 40 members of staff who run the shop on a voluntary basis. February 2023 saw a special ceremony where it was presented with a certificate personally signed by the King and a Crystal Award by the Lord Lieutenant of Derbyshire, Colonel John Wilson, OBE. So from here it's a case of heading back towards the doctor's surgery, but Winster still has two other landmarks to see, both of which are a ways away from the village centre. Okay, we've made it back to the doctor's surgery, which means we've made it all the way around Winster. Well, on foot anyway. There are two more things though I would like to highlight here within the village. One of them is the school, the other one is the playing field. They're right next door to each other on the way out of here. On the road out of Winster towards Matlock is the local primary school. The current Winster school was opened in 1866, but the chances are there were others that predated it. School life used to be very different for pupils at this school. There were once separate entrances for the boys and for the girls. Once inside, they sat in rows of tiered desks in the opposite direction to how the classrooms are set out today. There were no school dinners here. Instead, children went home and came back again afterwards. They also had time off for harvest and potato picking. The school used to have a house for the head teacher attached to it. This now houses the administration office and the head teacher's office. The school has a plaque that celebrates its centenary from 1866 to 1966. It was presented to Winster School by Queen Elizabeth II. The school logo was designed by a former pupil. It represents a lead miner's lantern going down a mine shaft. Ideal really, given the lead mining industry's influence on the village. The last landmark is literally next door to the school. It's the playing field, which features a tennis court and a football pitch. It's not massive, but it rounds this episode off nicely. Well, almost. Now, just before we go, if you search for Winster on Wikipedia, you'll find a story on its page that tells of a fatal duel that took place in the village in the 1820s. As reported in the Times on the 2nd of June 1821, a local surgeon named William Cuddy was courting a girl called Mary, the daughter of the wealthy Brittlebank family of Otto House. In May 1821, one of her brothers, William Brittlebank, tried to end their association by sending Cuddy a letter, challenging him to a duel with pistols. Cuddy refused to reply to the letter, but the following day, 3 of the Brittlebank brothers and a mutual friend named Edmund Spencer arrived in his garden with 2 loaded pistols. After reluctantly accepting one of the weapons, Cuddy went toe-to-toe with William Brittlebank. It was like a scene straight out of an old Wild West movie. The pair walked 15 yards away from each other, turned and fired. 2 shots were heard, but only Cuddy was hit. He died a few hours later. 2 of the Brittlebanks were tried in Derby in August 1821, but were found not guilty of murder. As for William, he fled with a £100 reward on his head. It's thought he went to Australia. So concludes another Derbyshire Dales run, and I reckon those 5 were among the best yet. We still have 60 to visit in the Dales though. It's one of those districts that seems never ending. Having said that, I always enjoy my trips out here, so long may this continue. More Derbyshire on the way soon, but this weekend we're off back into Lincolnshire once again. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.